Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
Hello, welcome back.
Today, we are going to be doing another dilemma, and we wanted to talk all about the idea of, or the pressures actually, of having a certain income by a certain age and maybe owning a house, or all these typical milestones that everyone kind of suggests in society in general of when you have to have things done by. And when you get to those ages, if you haven't done them by that age, you kind of feel like a bit of a failure. So we wanted to talk about that, and we wanted to talk about our experiences of meeting those general expectations or not, and kind of how we've dealt with that and the pressures in general. So I guess like the main one, especially from this dilemma, has talked about earning a certain income by a certain age. Now, this one for me, I've never really had. I'm trying to think if I've ever had like, oh, by this age I need to be on X amount of money, or anyone's kind of told me that there is a certain amount. Have you had that experience?
I've had it a little bit, but more when I first entered like the workforce and started working post uni, and that was only because of like this, not the stigma, but like maybe the expectations around like accountancy, and becoming qualified. When I got my job, it was like a very famous incentive of becoming a CA was that you'd, in 3 years after studying, you'd be on like 40,000 plus for the rest of your career. Like you'd always have a minimum salary of like 40,000. I didn't even get that, first of all. So that was a bit of a gut punch, but that was the only thing I had. But I have definitely realized in myself that my perception of salary brackets to age has been super duper skewed. First of all, since becoming like an internet entrepreneur and understanding like how much money there is to earn, that's really skewed things. And then also just being in like a big corporate and then being exposed to people earning such a wide variety of salaries based on whether they work in finance or they work in banking or they work in like a more consumer related industry. I feel like the more I've worked, the less of a grasp I have on how much you should be earning by a certain age, which it doesn't work that way. Yeah. But even with like my personal self and like my own insecurities, I've not really felt bad about my own salary until I have realized how much other people earn.
Right, exactly that. I think it's the comparison that then starts to make you question, oh, I'm not at the level I should be at.
Yeah,
But I
should.
was quite similar to you, yeah. Very much in inverted commas should. Because yeah, I guess when I entered corporate, I'm trying to think, did I actually have a different expectation of what my salary should look like? Because when I was told my salary, I kind of just took it. And I was like, okay, that's what I'm meant to be on. That's a grad salary. And then obviously you get told, like, oh, promotions will come up and every year your salary should incrementally increase anyway. And I guess when you're coming from the perspective of already being at an established firm, somewhere that is notoriously like got their good reputation of somewhere that's, people aim high to work at, I feel like you do fall into that like place of accepting what is given to you. At least that's what I
I
did.
think you're hammered into that kind of mindset though. Like you're made to
Because it's like, be grateful that you're
exactly. Yeah, because
So
it's so competitive and all that. Because my
yeah.
entry point into my grad scheme, I had been working in retail the summer before I started work, and because I was working full time because it was summer and I was trying to like save up some money, I had an idea of what my like prorated salary was. So then I just naturally expected more going into like this big fancy corporate. Like I just like worked so hard to secure this job, and then I started that job and it was either the exact same or just under what I was making in retail. So for me that was like, oh, like it was a bit of a deflating moment when I realized that. It's because I had that comparison to make myself. But I can understand if you didn't have that comparison and you actually just put your head down, worked, you'd be in more of a position where you're like, oh, I'm actually grateful to be being paid something every month now. And you know what, like there were so many benefits and stuff, like that's why they sold it to us, right? You get all the
I
benefits.
think that's what I focused on more,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, is that extra. Because I was actually similar. To be fair, I think there was one point quite early on in my career that I did kind of break down and figure out how much per hour I was getting. Because then I wanted to compare it to like my summer jobs and everything I had done prior to actually getting my grad job. And it did work out actually that per hour I was basically getting the same amount, after tax and everything else had been taken out. And at that point, I was like, oh, damn, I worked all, did all this work and like made all this effort and thought I was going to land some like dream income job to literally be in the same position. But at the same time, because of the benefits and, your holidays and I guess just the reputation and like where you were and then the progression as well. Like, I guess a big thing that was always pushed is the idea of, but you can, climb the career ladder. You don't, because in the other jobs that I used to have, it was like you're capped and you could only really move up if someone else got fired or retired or left or there wasn't really any room. So I guess like those little extra things were kind of, I guess, marketing very well to the point where I was like, oh, okay, this is actually really good
Yeah,
then.
it's like I believe the dreams of myself from 3 years from now. It's
Yeah.
fine. But even that, like, I used to use that as a justification for why I was like almost settling a little bit at that point as well. I'd be like, oh well, in 3 years once I qualify, I'll be making 40,000, so it's fine. Like this is what I have to do to get there. But
Yeah.
obviously that didn't happen for me. It didn't happen because of COVID actually. Because they like there's a lot of like salary freezing and things like that, because I think it happened to a couple of different companies and a couple of different industries. So COVID definitely messed things up for me in particular, but I sometimes find it hard not to compare myself to other people. And you know what, right now, I know I left my full-time job like just over a month ago, but I'm still trying to not get annoyed at myself for settling for what I believe is a low salary, now knowing what my age mates are making in either similar roles or because they actually were savvy enough to pick up skills from certain jobs and then actually just job hop a little bit more than I did. I think I definitely took a bit of a role of comfort, and also because I switched up my career so much. Like we both did the same thing. We moved into consulting at similar points in our career, and like I kind of justified that in my head to be like, okay, well, I've made like a horizontal career move. I now have to stick with like a similar salary, if not like not that big of a jump, and that's like a sacrifice I thought I was making at the time, whereas actually my peers who were not doing that, who were not staying in the same corporate for a number of years, were job hopping, utilizing their experience, and are actually making so much more money right now. And sometimes
Yeah.
I find it hard to like look back and think like, why did I like stick that out for so long? Why didn't I act with a bit more savviness and like confidence as well, and like actually follow my own advice about upskilling and then using that to earn more money?
Yeah.
I find it hard to not beat myself up about that. Do you do the same thing, or were you quite happy with your salary progression?
Do you know what? Thinking about it now, I think I should have probably paid more attention to that switch I made, because I don't know about you, but my salary like went up a lot when I switched from into consulting. So at that point, I should have clocked that job hopping was what I should have continued to do rather than just like sat in that and been happy about, oh, I'm now making so much. Because my mindset was, I'm making so much more money now that I've moved. So everything now is better than I would have had if I'd stayed. And that was my consistent mindset like throughout. I was like, well, now, even though like a year on, when my salary went up a little bit, I was like, but I wouldn't have even been on that salary if I'd stayed. So that was my constant mindset, and I shouldn't have done that. And I think because my salary did go up, and I was then a lot more comfortable than I thought I would be, and I didn't expect it. That's what kind of kept me stuck a little bit in terms of like in that comfort bubble and not really seeking out like to go and job hop again on new opportunities, or getting more money basically, which is a lot what people do these days.
Yeah, and I remember having those conversations with you. We were in such a place of like gratitude and like
Yeah.
appreciation for our salaries at the time, and like even though that period of time existed, and I was and still am, I was like grateful for the salary jump I got at the time. I think me at that point in my career, and probably you as well, to be honest, like we should have been earning so much more. And like in my head, I'm like, I just justified
Yeah.
things so much just because I was used, like my barrier or my expectations were so low.
I think it's the expectations, yeah. And maybe it's because our expectations were set from so early on that that's like you are not going to earn that much in your first good few years before then you start to like creep up the ladder. But do you know what's frustrating is I agree with you. Like I heard so much talk in the office about how, oh, this senior manager's gone to this firm because they've been offered more, and then they've come back and then been offered more again, and people would constantly move back and forth even between the big four, or they'd go into industry because they were higher paid there. And I'd hear those conversations all the time, but I've never reflect on my own
Yeah.
like decisions and be like, should I do that too? Or maybe I did, but I was like, that's a lot of effort to not really know, then to start again. I think I was always afraid of that, starting again. And I was always afraid of, yeah, like I guess the unknown as well. I guess I did just get comfortable, and I thought I finally landed, the dream job. Like I worked hard enough to get here. Now I've got it. Why would I jeopardize it or try and like rock the boat? Or, I mean, even moving within the company itself was stressful enough. So to think about like leaving, and then what if I hated it there, and what if it wasn't as good of an experience, and then can I come back, and all those like unknowns and questions that I had, I just thought it wasn't worth it, but probably would have been, because realistically I wasn't happy enough to like wanted to stay that much in the end anyway. Like I don't work there anymore, so it probably would have been a better decision for me to actually take those things seriously.
Yeah. And I think something we're both really massively discounting right now is the fact that we had these really like lucrative and inspiring side hustles going on in the background that
Mm-hmm.
like I definitely use that as a way to make my job okay to be in, even though it was comfortable and it wasn't the most high paying. Because to me, that effort you said as well of like going out and trying to find a new job, that effort would
Mm-hmm.
take away from the energy I could then put into
The
my
time, yeah.
creator like career and stuff like that, which I think we both really valued a lot more at the time, and more so now because it's our thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's definitely a different thing for us at that stage of our life that at the time stopped me from comparing to other people, because I was like, well, other people don't have these other side hustles and stuff going on, so that was okay. But what do you also think about the whole kind of like having an actual financial goal, or maybe like life goal by a certain age as well? Because I when I got my flat, everyone around me was buying a place and like was looking or thinking about buying.
Really?
Yeah, it was definitely like it did feel like a generational, okay, this is the next thing to move on to now. And that's not why we bought our flat, but I definitely noticed around us that like buying was on a lot of people's minds. And obviously I don't live in London as well, so it's definitely an easier conversation and stuff to have in the
Yeah.
kind of communities and stuff that I'm a part of. But did you think about that as well? Because I think obviously for you, buying wasn't just motivated by like this is a life goal, or it's like a just a next step of my life. I think for you it was more of a like financial driven goal, right?
Yeah, I think for me, at the point that I bought, so I think I just turned 24
Because
when I bought
same.
my flat. Really?
Well, yeah, I was like 3 months into being 24.
Yeah, I just turned pretty much 24 when everything like completed. And I think at that stage, I'm trying to think like where everyone else was at. I think I was still quite early on into my career, so everyone else was very much just career driven and like focused on um I guess like just their own like career paths and stuff. And obviously I was too, but my motivation came a lot from wanting to move out, from wanting to like, I guess I had that goal for such a long time. So for me, it felt like it took ages for me to get to that point, because I'd had the goal of like having my own place even like before, like while I was at uni. Because I always wanted to kind of just move into my own place after uni, but it didn't really work like that because I still needed that time to save up. So I guess at that point, there was not really much talk about people at a similar age to me buying their own places and stuff. So I never felt like I was on like this timeline where I didn't feel pressure from outside. It was something that I just genuinely wanted for myself and wanted to do. Um, and then it was only obviously after that, I think I realized like how many other people were like trying to do the same thing. Or to be honest, a lot of the people that I was around lived at home were quite happy too. So I think I was a bit of like an oddball in the sense that I like bought my own place and I was like doing my own thing. Um, but then, or like any other, I guess a lot of my other friends were like more focused on like marriage versus like buying a property first. Like I guess I did it the opposite way around to a lot of people around me, that their mindset would be like, I need to get married first.
Yeah.
At least the girls, and then buy my
I
property.
was gonna say, like, I think maybe the difference for you as well is that you, like, maybe the people that you're around that you'd be comparing yourself to were more like, typically in like South Asian culture as well, you would buy a place with your partner after you get married, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the big points of contention I had with my parents when we bought this flat,
Really?
because we didn't get married before buying it.
Oh, and you both bought it together,
Yes, yeah,
right?
I bought my flat with
Oh.
my boyfriend, and we weren't engaged or married, still aren't engaged or married. So like, it was a really big point of
Yeah.
saying big point of
So was
contention.
the issue of like you doing it in the wrong
Yeah,
order versus
doing
like
it in the
you
wrong
having
order.
yeah.
But like that didn't even cross my, like, it turned into an argument with my parents as I brought up the conversation around we wanted to buy. Like, I didn't even realize that there was an order of things to do.
Mm-hmm.
So literally, like, when we were thinking about buying, we were thinking more of the financial benefits to buying a place together at the time. Like, buying a place in Edinburgh specifically, like, it was very financially motivated. It wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
life goals motivated. And I didn't, and it's only through like meeting you and meeting other like South Asian people online I've realized that there's actually an order in which people do things. And like, that causes contention like more within the community as well. And that, from that point of view, I can understand how like feeling the pressure of like doing things by a certain age or life stage can feel really heavy. But I also see with like my Caucasian friends that the pressure to buy comes at like almost like an age gap as well. Like, I feel like 25 to 30, almost everyone around me has bought their first place, like engaged or not, married or not. Yeah, and it's
Really?
like, if you're renting it, you almost feel like you have to like not justify it, but yeah, justify it a little bit.
Do you not think it's because like typically in South Asian families, they actively want their kids to stay home, whereas I feel like in white families it's the opposite mentality. Like their parents are like, you're an adult now, like you go and have your own life and do your own thing. But I feel like in South Asian culture it's very much like, no, my kids are gonna stay with me until they're 62 years old. um and we're all gonna live under the same roof, and even if they get married, like their wives or whatever are gonna come live with us. And I feel like the mentality is so different that you're never really pushed to buy a house. You're always pushed to get married, but not necessarily like buy your own place, I think. Like I don't have many Asian friends that their like parents or their family have been like, why aren't you buying your own house and why aren't you moving out? I've
Yeah,
never heard like those conversations
yeah,
happen.
it's always the opposite.
But yeah, it is. But yeah, I think, do you know what, when I was similar to you in the sense I didn't realize that there were these certain, I don't even say rules because they're not even rules. It's just like
I
some
think it's like an
people think that
unspoken
things
rule.
should be done. Yeah, maybe a little bit. But I only realized when I publicized, I guess, me moving out. And obviously I wasn't married when I moved out or bought my own place. And it was only when I put it online that I had a lot of judgment from like other South Asians and people that were just like, well, why have you done that? And you're not even married. And like, it was only at that point I realized, like, oh, people like think this is wrong. What's wrong with it? Like, I was so confused because I didn't get that in my personal life. So I was a bit like, that's when it kind of hit me that, oh, okay, this isn't the done thing, or this is a bit abnormal to a lot of people. And it isn't like the correct timeline of events in a lot of people's minds. But at the same time, that is also so freaking irrelevant. Like, I hate the idea that like that should upset someone that much, or like that should stop someone from doing something because they're worried about, oh, well, my timeline doesn't match what is in someone else's head.
Yeah, and let's talk about more on how to like deal with those feelings of feeling like you're not moving with the status quo and that you're doing things in like quote unquote wrong order. Because as much as it's really easy to like say to you as a listener to be like, oh, well, your timeline is not the same as someone else's, like, why should it be relevant? You have your own life to live. I definitely get like sucked up into feelings of like, oh, well, why am I not like at a certain, why do I not have a certain number of savings in my bank account by this age? Or like, why do I not have like X amount invested by this age? Like, what have I done wrong? Especially when it comes to like financial goals and stuff, you can feel very like where did that money go? Like, did I ever earn it? Did I spend it all? Did I put it in the wrong place? Did I like do things in the wrong order? And like what I really have to focus on, and it's so intentional, you have to do it so proactively, which is like part of why, being aware of your feelings of like comparison is so important, because that's the first step. But you have to so intentionally like feel grateful for the things that you have in your life, and you really have to like shift the spotlight off of other people, like even if that means like adjusting what you're consuming on social media, adjusting how much of your friends' lives you're seeing, and like letting that trigger you. Like if you're getting triggered by seeing all of your like social circle do all of these things that you feel like you're not doing, you need to like shut yourself off from that, like actively, instead of consuming it and then feeling bad about yourself. It's almost like controlling the controllables a little bit. But do you have any things that you do to like stop yourself feeling that, the letting the comparison steal all your joy?
Yeah, I guess in a similar way, I don't even go there in terms of, I don't try and seek out like what people at my age, like what are in their savings accounts and how much have they invested and all these things to compare myself to. I don't actively go and see like what is that average number, because I don't think you can ever create like an average number for that. Like in my head, I always think about how like we're all dealt with different circumstances in general. Especially financially, it affects you the most, I think, in terms of like what responsibilities have you had? Like what reasons do you have for you not being in that same position as someone else? Because for example, a lot of people might have help from their parents. A lot of people might have privileges that you don't have. So there's literally no point. Like if, for example, someone else had like got loads of money invested in stocks and shares and they got their own house, but then their parents had basically paid the entire deposit of the house, and you're not in the position where you you don't have that kind of support and you're having to start from the ground up, then there's no point yourself comparing. Like there's no comparison there then, because you're having to do it on your own and you're having to figure things out for yourself, and you can't, it's not a like for like situation.
Yeah,
And
apples and
it's
oranges.
exactly, so you can only really compare yourself to someone else if they're in the exact same position as you, which 10 out of 10 times is never going to be the case. Like you're never going to find someone else that's in the exact same financial position as you, that's grown up in the same way as you, that now has the same opportunities that you do, that now has the same like knowledge and skills and community and network as you do. Like it's always going to be so different. And while you can still, like look at your situation with fresh eyes and go, look, I'm doing the best with what I have, and you can still like, work hard to gain that knowledge and skills yourself, it does you no favors by looking at someone else and thinking, well, they're further ahead than me and I've not reached that point yet, and like beating yourself up in that sense, because you don't know what, step up that they've had behind closed doors that's obviously helped them get that, which is good for them, but then leave them over there. Like, you don't need to worry about like where you are in relation to that, because you're not on the same path anyway. Like, I always tell myself that whatever someone else is doing financially or otherwise, like, we're not heading to the same destination, so why am I going to worry about like them being further along? And further along is so, what does that even mean? Like, at the end of the day, like, what is the end goal? It's not to like beat someone at their life. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's not a competition here. So this whole being further along than someone else is so like, we've created that in our own heads, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, it's a way to deal with like insecurities and like a lack of self-esteem,
Mm,
isn't it? Like if you feel
yeah.
incomplete in parts of your life, and that's what kind of people who struggle with feeling jealous about other people and like creating this
Yeah.
competition usually is just projection and stuff, isn't it? So if you feel like you're feeling those like feelings of envy or jealousy at like other people's success, or even just like financial milestones that people around you have, it maybe is like
Mm-hmm.
that's your trigger to look in the mirror and be like, okay, well, what do I need to work on um to try and understand the context of my own life a bit better? Because I think I like the whole point of like with envy and stuff, like using the fact that like someone else who's maybe your age who has a savings pot of like 5 figures is just a sign to you that it's possible to be like your age
Yeah.
with a savings pot of 5 figures, which means like I can go out and do that. It doesn't mean that I'm therefore like worse or like second class to that person. It just means that a reality like that is possible for someone like me.
Be inspired by it,
Yeah.
yeah, rather than feel bad for not being at that stage. Yeah, you're so right. I think that's how I try to approach seeing anyone that's successful or got things that I don't have yet. It's like, it's not like it's not possible.
Yeah, and it becomes habitual, honestly. Like, the more you see other people's success as like inspiration for yourself, you just get constantly inspired by other people. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely at that point now where like I see all these like people doing cool things, and I'm like, the world is so full of opportunity, and you can't see anything but that. Like, the more you do it, it's just like a habit. It's like going to the gym. It's like,
It's a mindset shift, isn't it?
yeah, it's a mindset shift, and it just becomes easier with time. You get to a point where like you don't even feel jealous anymore. You're just like constantly like, oh, I didn't realize that was possible. I'm going to try and do that myself.
Yeah.
um but what do you also think of like how people use like goals that other or like age mates have, using those goals for yourself? Because one thing I think is kind of weird is the whole idea, and you know, not weird, but like impactful,
Uh-huh.
is the whole idea of like moving to a big city or shifting your entire life for a big city. Because I think that goal in itself, and speaking specifically about the goal of like big city lifestyle, it impacts your money and your like lifestyle and like the freedom you have so much. Yet I feel like a lot of people put that on their vision board to like spend a few years in London, spend a few years in Sydney, spend a few years in New York, whatever it is. But like, why?
Do you know what? I think it does come down to like individual goals. I feel like it's only wrong if you're just doing it because you're like, well, everyone's doing it and I want a piece of that. I
Mm-hmm.
think at that point, then it just becomes a bit like, well, then you're a sheep just trying to follow the same like goals. That's not your personal goal. That's just you trying to like keep up with like what you see going on around you.
Yeah.
So I get the idea of like wanting to experience somewhere new. Like, I've always thought about even going to live in another country for like X amount of time, like temporarily, just to experience it and just to be somewhere different and just to, like just see what that would be like. But at the same time, that's that's just been a I guess you could say a goal. It's not something I might not even do, but it's just been an idea that I've had because I just think it'd be cool to like not spend my entire life in the UK in that
Yeah.
one country, and like that's what I get to experience. And obviously you get to holiday and stuff, but I think living somewhere is quite different. So I kind of get why people would have that goal, but at the same time I do understand that there's a lot of people that kind of have those goals, or they kind of talk themselves into wanting things like that because it looks trendy or looks like the done thing, when actually it's not really a goal they have themselves, and then they fork out all that money to go and like kind of chase this thing that they think is cool, or because everyone else is doing it, and then they realize actually that's not really something that they cared for in the first place. They got and burnt a load of money,
Yeah.
and then they still then have to go return to wherever they were and kind of build things back up again, or maybe they're a bit further down their own timeline where they wanted to be because of that like time that they spent chasing everyone else's goals essentially.
And then that's completely it. It's like you have to think about what your goals actually are, and like I've just heard from so many people who go, like specifically the people I've heard from, they go to London because they want this like lifestyle for like X number of years, but then they, what their actual goals are is finding a partner, buying a house in the countryside. And I'm like, well, why did you go to London?
But I think it's like that like people want to maybe be able to say that they've done it, or they want to just like have the experience that everyone talks highly of, and then they want a piece of it maybe, but then actually it's not really aligned with their ultimate goal in the end, but it's just something that maybe they just want to put. It's a bit of a FOMO, I think, that people have towards certain things,
and it's
like
an
that.
expensive FOMO. Like that's why
Yeah.
I feel like I have a chip on my shoulder about this like big city living thing, just because it's actually such an expensive mistake to make if you're not thinking about like what your actual goals are, because the impact of, like, we know that there's a cost of living crisis, the impact of that on our like well-being, on our financial goals, on our health goals, on our career goals is crazy, and it's not really considered as much when we're thinking about like dropping everything and moving to such a big city that has such a bad like housing crisis and such a bad like literally like the cost of living in London is completely different to my cost of living here in Edinburgh.
It's not even habitable anymore. Like, you know, London itself is like a bit scary these
Yeah,
days.
you can't even walk with your phone out.
Like the crimes. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like, what are people like hyping over?
yeah.
But do you know what? It goes without saying, if you have the money, if you have the means, and if you have that dream, like go for it. But I think it's just one of those things that people that are necessarily going to put themselves in hardship for the sake of chasing that thing, I think you have to really sit with yourself and think about, why am I going for that? And is that something that aligns with what I want as one of my end goals and how I want to live my life? And if it's not, something that's financially attainable, then think twice about it, because there's no point putting yourself in that position for the sake of being able to say that you've done it. Because ultimately that's all you're really doing if it's not really where you want to be. Like if that's somewhere where you want to settle and, you know, like spend a good few years of your life, and that's like a city that you would consider home, then maybe. But if it's just like a 2-year stint, 1-year stint, just to like experience it, but then you know it's going to burn such a big hole in your pocket, then you're just like, future you is not going to thank you for that at all. So aside from moving to another city and buying a home and earning a certain amount of money, the only other thing I can think of that has like this major timeline attached to it is marriage and finding a partner. I think finding a partner, the step before the actual marriage, is also something that's like crazy pressurized. It's like, how are you actually meant to physically find someone in a certain amount of time if like, do you know what I mean? I think it's crazy, just the notion, that the mentality of like, I have to find someone by this age, and then if I don't, then like that's it, failure.
Yeah, I think especially with women as well, like there's a lot more pressure to be young and fertile before you find your partner, and then that in itself is like, I think it is something that's difficult to battle with, like confidence wise, especially my single friends as well. Like as we're getting older, say getting older, we're like 28. You know, we're as we're growing up, we're thinking like each year that goes by that you don't meet someone, or like you meet someone and it doesn't last, you question whether it's like your own ability to find and keep a partner that's the problem, compared to actually being able to find a quality person itself, which I think can come up as an issue. But I don't know, I can't speak on it so much because I literally I met my boyfriend when we were both 19, so fairly young, but I didn't even like, milestones weren't on my mind at that point. It was just like, oh, he was a nice person, and it just kept staying nice. You know what I mean?
Well, that's good to know. I'm glad. But I'm quite similar to you in the sense that when I met my now husband, we were very young, and at that point, again, timelines were not on anyone's mind. We were like still in education. But then, having said that, and we only just got married, and I'm in my late 20s, and that's considered late, and that's considered like, it's weird because even though I technically already like found my partner, I feel like a lot of people would still find it like that's past the right time to like get married. And then obviously like now people think about kids, and if you're having kids in your 30s and you're less fertile, and that's a problem, and you're like a ticking clock, and there's all these like extra pressures that get put on you when you reach like your late 20s, early 30s and still haven't had kids yet.
Yeah, the kids one is massive.
And it's more from like pressures on a woman, I think. But again, like, so I've seen a lot of discourse on this on like online on TikTok and stuff. And I don't know, there was a phase where I was getting a lot of videos on my For You page about women who had like babies in their 30s, like I want to say like mid to early 30s. And they were basically talking about like the benefits of it, you know, like kind of already having established careers, already being established in their own minds and their confidence, you know, their own self-esteem. Like they're just more assured people because they're grown. And then they've also like experienced life a little bit without having children to look after. And now they're at that stage of life where they're like, yeah, starting that chapter. And obviously I feel like there's pros and cons to both. Like I've equally seen people say there's cons to like having kids later versus having them earlier, because maybe you have less energy and time because you're fully fledged in your career and you spent so much time on your own that's kind of your routine, and it's hard to then switch over. So there's pros and cons to both that I've seen, quite equally balanced as well. So I feel like that helps me like not put the pressure on myself, because I'm like, well, if I had kids back when I was in my early 20s, I would have struggled. But then there's people that had their kids then and are fine. But then there's also people that have their kids in their early 30s and they have fine like pregnancies and labor and everything in the same way that probably a younger woman would have it. I mean, at any stage you are still at risk of complications and issues, and people will say it gets worse when you get older, but reality says, and like there's so many people that have kids when they're younger and still have a bunch of different issues. Like I even know friends that have been pregnant earlier on, they still like they didn't really have the easiest of births and stuff and struggled. So I feel like when maybe you hear about different people's experiences at different ages, and when it comes to that topic in particular, it kind of eases your mind a little bit as to like, well, I'm not too late, and it's not, and I haven't made it worse for myself by waiting. And everyone's experience is so unique anyway that you can't physically compare, because whether you'd have had your kids earlier or later, your experience would be different to someone else that you know anyway.
Yeah, and I think I get more caught up about like the risks of like having them like after your mid-30s as well, because like just because my personal opinion is that I'm 28, and I don't know if I envision kids in the next 5 years. So then I'm like, okay, so that takes me to being 33.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, okay, well, what if at 33 I'm thinking again like, oh, I still don't want kids for
Next
another
5
5 years. Yeah, so I get worried about like, I get worried that I'll get to my late 30s and be like, I should have just had them when I was in my early 30s, but then I don't have that urge, so I'm like, I don't want to have them for the sake of like
Yeah.
being efficient with my body right now as well, because I'm like, I'm definitely of the mindset that, like, definitely in a very selfish like era in the sense of like I'm not ready to give up my life for a child yet, and I know that I would have to do that, and the fact that I'm even like phrasing it like give up my life probably shows that I'm like not ready to even
But I think
consider
you're
that
also
yet.
quite realistic about the like what you have to come.
Yeah.
I feel like people, you shouldn't take it lightly having kids, and I think you shouldn't just think it's like an addition. Like, it is going to take over your life, and it is going to be your main focus for many, many, many years.
Yeah.
So it's an important decision to like dwell on, not just, you know, make a rash decision on something like that.
Yeah. And that does definitely applies for like when you're thinking about, oh, well, do I need to have kids because I'm of childbearing age and everyone around me is having kids? Like, I feel like as a generation, we're not really doing that anymore. Because I feel like our parents' generation kind of did that. Like, I feel like there's
I'm
a
at
lot
that
of,
age.
yeah, like, I feel like there's a lot of families out there that didn't need to be families in the sense of like, there are plenty of parents who probably just had kids because it
When they
was
shouldn't have.
their turn. Yeah. Or if it was like
Yeah.
that stage of life. And like, I know that sounds like very lighthearted in the way I've just put it, but like I believe that there was a lot more pressure to just do like the life steps.
Well, it's crazy how it was just expected. It's like, okay, when's kids now? Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't even a question of like, should I, shouldn't I? It's like, when are they coming?
Yeah.
Which I find wild, because when you think about it, yeah, there's a lot of people I think that shouldn't have had kids because they, well, people didn't have kids for the right reasons, I think, a lot of the time, because then you don't actually think about what it takes to raise a child, and that's not really considered. I think in that generation's like perspective, it's just their expectation was purely the only reason. I think a lot of the time was, we're at that age, we got married now, and the next step after marriage is have kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that's the timeline that's followed.
Yeah. It's also like, I feel like having like getting married and having kids is also some kind of definition of success and happiness
Yeah.
to the outside world as well, which is why I think a lot of people have been pressured to do it, and I feel like a lot of people still get pressured to do it.
I feel like it's quite different now, though. Like, I feel like before you used to be seen as successful. I think in marriage is still a thing where it's like, until you're married, you're not seen as successful. But the kids, I've seen so much discourse on people like being really hell bent on the idea of, even if they're married, they don't want kids. And that being more accepted rather than it being like an automatic, well, then now your marriage is not valid because you don't have kids to,
Yeah.
you know, make that a whole family.
Yeah.
Um,
It pulls into question as well, like what does marriage even mean to people? Is that like your green light for kids? Because
I
that
guess in
like everything is made
culture.
up in this world, you know, like I know in our culture it's more of it, that is the green light.
I feel like it's the security of like a family unit, and like once you've had the marriage. So I kind of agree with that like order of things for the sake of kids, but I don't necessarily agree with the expectation that kids are just gonna come. Because what about fertility issues? Like, does nobody consider that? Like, people actually can't have kids, some of them. So the pressure of that is crazy.
And I know,
Just
I feel like I've
assume.
heard a lot of like women on TikTok even being like, oh, no one let me enjoy just being a wife after I got married. It was just
Oh,
instantly like, oh, when are you getting pregnant? Oh, are you thinking about having a kid? And actually, if you got married just because you love your partner a lot and you
that
wanted the
wasn't
unity of
enough.
marriage, yeah, that wasn't enough for other people to just deem you as happy, which is crazy.
Yeah, that's kind of sad. It's like, aren't I enough on my own? Like, why do you need extra?
Yeah, yeah. It just goes to show, like, when you're thinking about your goals, your life goals, comparing them to other people, using these like income brackets or age brackets to determine them will leave you nothing short of miserable for the rest of your life if you like actually do that, because then you're actually tying yourself to other people's expectations of you, and like you're gonna it's harder to actually gain that validation from yourself.
Okay, guys, so I think that brings us to the end of the episode. I really hope that you enjoyed our little chat about timelines and societal expectations on these big goals that typically are on everyone's minds to kind of meet, and these expectations that are placed on us. And hopefully it makes you feel a little less alone if you're feeling like you're not attaining these things at the right time, whatever the right time means. Let us know in the comments if you're watching us on YouTube if you relate to anything we've just said or have anything to share from your own perspective, because we'd love to hear. And don't forget to give us a thumbs up as well and a rating if you're listening over on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We'd really, really appreciate hearing your feedback and just letting us know if you are enjoying the episodes. And with that being said, we'll catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.
Bye.